So we need to find the zeros. How do we find the zeros for number 4? Factor the numerator. So then I set the numerator equal to 0 and factor. So what are two factors of -5 that add to 4? 5 and -1. So this will be x plus 5 and x minus 1 equals 0. Then I have x is equal to -5 and x is equal to +1. So here my zeros are going to be x is equal to 1 and -5.
Oh, so you only factor the top?
Yeah, just for the zeros. How do I find the vertical asymptotes? Set the denominator equal to 0. So x is equal to -1. So my vertical asymptote is x is equal to -1. I can go ahead and put those on my graph now. So I have a vertical asymptote through -1 here. My zeros are 1 and -5. So that's where I cross the x-axis at those 2 points. How do I find a horizontal asymptote? The degrees. The degrees. So the degree on the top is 2. The degree on the bottom is what? 1. So what is it when you have the degree on top higher?
9.
I have no horizontal asymptote, but what will I have? A slant asymptote, because my top is 1 degree higher than the bottom. So I'm just going to jump to the slant asymptote next. So how do I find the slant asymptote? Put the denominator outside and the numerator goes inside. So long division. So how many times does x go into x squared? Or what times x gives us x squared? X. Then multiply. So I have x squared plus x. What's next? Change sign, add. These cross out, so I have 3x. What times x gives us 3x? 3. Then multiply 3x plus 3. Change a sign, combine. This would be -8. What do I do when my remainder is -8?
Just forget about it.
You ignore it. Doesn't matter. So what's my slant asymptote? Y equals x plus 3. You have to put that y equals because it's a line. Now let's graph my slant asymptote. This is always going to be in your y equals mx plus b form. B is what? 3, but what does that mean when graphing it? That's my y-intercept. So 3 is my y-intercept of my asymptote, not of the whole thing. 3 is my y-intercept, so I'm going to cross the y-axis at 3. And what's my slope? My slope is 1. So I go up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, this way. And then I'm just going to put my dotted line through there.
This is the first quiz for quarter 2.
First quiz for quarter 2, yes. All right, next let's find the holes. So my top factored into x plus 5 times x minus 1 over x plus 1. Do I have any factors that are the same?
No.
So do I have any holes?
No.
Nope.
Oh, I have a question about the holes. If it was x plus 5 and then x minus 1 there and then x minus 1.
How do I find the y-intercept?
Put everything is 0.
Plug in 0 for all the x's. So I have, okay, 0 squared plus 4 times 0 minus 5 over 0 plus 1. So this would be -5 over 1, which simplifies to -5. How do I write my y-intercept? 0, -5, because I plugged in 0 for x and got -5. So on my y-axis, I'm going to cross at -5.
Why don't you do that for the zeros?
If it asks for x-intercepts, because x-intercepts and zeros are the same thing, then you would have to list it as points. But zeros are just your values that make the graph 0. All right, domain. What would my domain be here? How do I find the domain?
Set the top.
No, the bottom.
The bottom not equal to 0. So this is not equal to 0, not equal. So x does not equal -1. So I have all real numbers except -1, but on the quiz, if it asks you to write your domain in interval notation, how would I do that? Negative infinity to -1. Awesome. Yes. So we found everything we need. Now we just have to graph. On your quiz, it will most likely say plug in 3 additional points. So you have to find 3 more points than the zeros and the y-intercepts that you already have there. So we're just going to find a couple. 3 in total. So let's plug in a value to the left of my vertical asymptote and a value to the right. So what's the number on the left side of my vertical asymptote? -2. So I'm plugging in -2 into my original. -2 squared plus 4 times -2 minus 5 over, bless you, -2 plus 1. So 4 minus 8 minus 5 over -1. This would be -9 over -1, so this would be 9. So I plugged in -2 and got 9. So I'm going to go to the left to -2 and up 9. Right there. So I have 2 points now above my slant asymptote, so I am pretty confident that my graph is going to hug this corner here. As I go to infinity, I get really, really close to the asymptotes, but don't touch them. So you just hug the asymptotes.
So the slant you can't cross.
You slant you can't cross.
Only the horizontal you can if you're close to it.
Only the horizontal you can possibly cross when you're close to the origin. Alright, so let's plug a number to the right of my vertical asymptote. 2? Yep, we already have 0 and 1, so let's plug in 2. So I have 2 squared plus 4 times 2 minus 5 over 2 plus 1. 2 squared is 4 plus 8 minus 5 over 3. So this would be 7 over 3. So I plugged in 2 and got 7/3, which is 2 1/3. So I'm going to go to the right 2 and up 2 and a little bit more. So there's my point. So now I'm just going to connect my dots. I get really close to the asymptotes, but don't cross them. Let's do the next one. I'm going to start by factoring it, because I know I'm eventually going to have to factor the top and the bottom. So do I have 2 factors of 6 that add to 5? 3 and 2. So this will be x plus 3 and x plus 2. What does the bottom factor into? X plus 3 and x minus 3. So right off the bat, I have something that repeats, so what's that? X plus 3 would be a whole. So I have a whole at x plus 3 equals 0. So where x is equal to -3, I have a whole.
So whichever ones repeat, you just set that equal to 0 and that's your answer?
That's your whole, yeah. That would be the x coordinate of my whole. How do I find the y coordinate of the whole?
Plug in -3 to what's left.
Plug whatever you got back into what's left. So I'm plugging in -3 into x plus 2 over x minus 3. So -3 plus 2 over -3 minus 3. -1 over -6, so this would be 1/6. So my whole is at -3, 1/6.
Wait, how can you even do that for the first?
I didn't have a whole for the first one.
Oh,
So -3, 1/6. So I did the whole first just to make sure, like, if I have a whole at -3, I'm not going to have a 0 at -3, and I'm not going to have a vertical asymptote through -3. Because if you have a whole, you can't have a vertical asymptote, and you can't have a 0 there.
wait, so when you got like
How do I find my zeros? Set the numerator equal to 0. So my zeros would be x is equal to -2. Because If I have a hole here, I'm not going to have a 0. So x is equal to -2 is my only 0. How do I find the vertical asymptote?
You set the bottom not equal to 0.
Set the bottom not equal to 0. Set the bottom equal to 0. So I have x is equal to 3. So that's my vertical asymptote.
Now you say after you find the hole, can you just leave it in that the whole time, or do you have to use the whole thing, like without the canceled out ones, for the domain?
You can leave it in it. You just want to look at the original for your horizontal asymptotes, because the coefficients out front might be different.
So for your domain, you won't put the whole.
Okay, I'm going to graph my vertical asymptote through 3. And I'm going to put my 0 at -2. And I can put my hole there too. So my hole is at -3 and 1/6. So that would be like here. How do I find my horizontal asymptote? The degree of the leading coefficient in the top and on the bottom. What do I look at if they're the same? The coefficients of the numerator over the denominator, so that would be 1/1. So how do I write my horizontal asymptote? Y equals 1. So on my graph, I'm going to have my horizontal asymptote through 1. Yes. Horizontal asymptote has to be y equals. Now let's find my y-intercept. How do I find the y-intercept? Plug in 0 for x. So I have 0 squared plus 5 times 0 plus 6 over 0 squared minus 9. So 6 over -9, -2/3. So how would I write that for my y-intercept? 0, -2/3, because I plugged in 0 for x and got 2/3 for y. So I'm going to stay on 0, go down 2/3. So that would be here. All right, now for my domain. How do I find the domain? Set the denominator not equal to 0. So my denominator here is not equal to 0. So x squared does not equal 9. Take the square root. So x does not equal what? Plus or minus 3. Does my graph exist where it has the hole? No, there's a gap in my graph, so that means there's a gap in my domain there. So I have to include that in the domain. -infinity to -3, then -3 to 3, and then 3 to infinity. Do I have a slant asymptote here? No. So none. Alright, so let's graph. On the left side of my vertical asymptote, I can be pretty confident that my graph is going to be down below here. So I'm just going to connect all the points and hug the asymptote. If you wanted to, you could plug in a number like -1 or -2, just so you would see that you'd come down here. So that would work. What should I do to find out what the right side of my graph is going to do?
Plug in 5.
I could plug in 5. That works. So I'm plugging in 5 into the original. So I have 5 squared plus 5 times 5 plus 6 over 5 squared minus 9. 5 squared is 25 plus 25 would be 50 plus 6 is 56 over 25 minus 9, which is 16. I can simplify this. 8 goes into both of them?
8. Yeah. 8 times 7.
So 7 over 2. So this would be 3.5. So I plugged in 5 and got 3.5. So I'm going to go to my graph, go to the right 5. and up 3.5. So I have a point here. So I can plug in another point too, just to be extra sure, but I know my graph is just gonna hug this corner here. Like that. So first let's find the zeros. How can I find the zeros? Set the top equal to 0. I'm gonna have to factor the top. What does the top factor into? X plus 2, x minus 2. So my zeros are what? 2 and negative 2. So I'm going to put those on my graph. I'm going to go to the right 2 and to the left negative 2. Now let's find my vertical asymptotes. How do I find the vertical asymptote? Set the denominator equal to 0. How do I factor the denominator? Take out the greatest common factor, so that would be 3x. What am I left with? X minus 5. So 3x is equal to 0, which gives me x is equal to 0. And x minus 5 is equal to 0, so x is equal to 5. So these are my two vertical asymptotes here. X is equal to 0 and x is equal to 5. So I'm going to have a dotted line through 0 and another one through 5. For the horizontal asymptote, I look at the degrees. So if they're the same, then what do I look at? The leading coefficient. So I have 1/3. So how would I write my horizontal asymptote? Y equals 1/3. So I'm going to have a dotted line through 1/3. Do I have any holes here? No, my bottom factored into this 3x times x minus 5, and my top factored into this. Nothing repeats, so I have no holes. How do I find my y-intercept? Plug in 0 for x. So x squared minus 4 over 3 times 0 squared minus 15 times 0. So I get negative 4 over 0. What happens when 0 is in the bottom?
It's 0.
It's 0. No, it's not. It's undefined. So do I have a y-intercept? Nope.
What do you undefined?
There's just none. All right, next, let's find the domain. How do I find the domain? Set the bottom not equal to 0. So this does not equal 0, this doesn't equal 0, this doesn't equal 0. So then how would I write my domain in interval notation? Awesome. So you always start with the smallest numbers first and just work your way up to the biggest numbers. Do I have a slant asymptote here? No. Because for a slant asymptote, you're not going to have a slant asymptote and a horizontal asymptote. All right, now let's figure out what our graph is going to do. So I want to plug in a point in between all of my vertical asymptotes. So what's the value to the left of my vertical asymptote that I can plug in? What is it? I can do negative 1. So negative 1 squared minus 4 over 3 times negative 1 squared minus 15 times negative 1. So 1 minus 4 over 3 plus 15. So that's 18. Negative 3 over 18. Negative 1/6. So I plugged in 1 and got 1/6. So that's negative 1/6. So that's below down here. So I can graph here. I know I'm going to hug this corner. It's going to look like that. Any questions on how I got that line? All right, now let's move on to the middle. In the middle, I want to plug in something to the left of my x-intercept and something to the right, just to see what my graph is going to do, because my graph could look like a parabola down here, or it could look like an x cubed graph and go like this. So I want to plug in something on both sides to see where I'm going to be. So I can plug in 1. So I have 1 squared minus 4 over 3 times 1 squared minus 15 times 1. Negative 3 over 3 minus 15 would be negative 12. So this would be 1/4. So I'm above my x-axis here, up here, 1/4. So I know my graph on the left side of this point is going to go this way, because it's not going to cross back through the x-axis, so it just has to go up.
But there's asymptote.
So you can cross a horizontal asymptote when you're close to the origin, but you can never cross a vertical asymptote. So just think about it as like a horizontal asymptote kind of has a soft spot in the middle. Horizontal asymptotes describe your behavior as you go through to infinity. So in the middle, you can cross. All right, let's plug in another value to the right of that x-intercept. Let's plug in 3. So I have 3 squared minus 4 over 3 times 3 squared minus 15 times 3. So on the top, I get 16 minus 4, which is 12. Nope, 9 minus 4, which is 5. Whoa. On the bottom, I have 3 squared, which is 9 times 3 is 27 minus 45. 27 minus 45 is negative 18. So I get negative 5 over 18. So I plugged in 3, got a negative fraction, so I'm going to be down here. So my graph is going to go this way. All right, so what's the number to the right of my right vertical asymptote that I could plug in? Let's plug in 6. So I have 6 squared minus 4 over 6 squared times 3 minus 15 times 6. So 6 squared is 36 minus 4 is 32. 6 squared is 36 times 3, 108. Minus 15 times 6 is 90. 32 over 108 minus 90 is 18. So this is like almost 2-ish. So I plugged in 6, and I need to go up 2-ish. Here-ish. So I'm above the horizontal asymptote over here, so I know I'm going to hug this corner here. All right, next page. Let's look at number 9. So first thing it asks for is to factor. So I want to factor the top and the bottom. How do I factor the top? So I take out an x, and what am I left with? And can I factor x squared minus 9? Into what? So on the top here, I'm going to have x times x plus 3 times x minus 3. On the bottom, how do I factor this? Take out what? 3. And then I'm left with x squared minus 3x, no, minus 2x. Minus 3. Do I have two factors of negative 3 that add to negative 2? 3 and negative 3 and 1. So this would be 3 times x minus 3 times x plus 1. So all I did was factor. I have a whole, so I can jump ahead and work out the whole now. So x minus 3 overlaps. So I can take that out, and I'm left with x times x plus 3 over 3 times x plus 1. So it crossed out x minus 3, so I set that equal to 0 to find my whole. So x is equal to 3. That's my x value for my whole. How do I find the y value? Plug it into whatever's left. So I have 3 times 3 plus 3 over 3 times 3 plus 1. So this will be 3 times 6 on the top, which is 18, over 3 times 4 on the bottom, which is 12. Can I simplify 18 over 12?
Yeah.
To what?
36/4.
So 4, no.
3 over 2.
6 goes into both of these. So 3 over 2. So there's my whole. How do I find the horizontal asymptote? You look at the degrees. So I have cubed on top and squared on the bottom. So when the top is bigger, you have no horizontal asymptote. How do I find my vertical asymptote? Set the denominator equal to 0. I know I'm not going to have a vertical asymptote through my hole, so I'm going to do whatever I crossed out already, whatever's left, and set that equal to 0. So 3, I can divide 3 on both sides, so it goes away. So I have x plus 1 is equal to 0. Subtract 1 on both sides, x is equal to negative 1. So my vertical asymptote is x is equal to negative 1. And then how do I find the roots? Factor the top. So my top factored into this here. So I have x times x plus 3 is equal to 0. So x is equal to 0. X plus 3 is equal to 0. So x is equal to negative 3. So x is equal to 0 and negative 3. So which graph is this one? C. Because I can see that I have a hole here, even though they put a point, not like a hole, but I have a hole there. And my vertical asymptote is through negative 1, and that's the only one. So C. Any questions here? All right, let's look at number 10. First thing I want to do is factor it. So the top, what are two factors of negative 12 that add to negative 1? Negative 4 and positive 3. So x minus 4, x plus 3. What are two factors of negative 8 that add to negative 2? X minus 4 times x plus 2. All right, so do I have a hole anywhere? Yep, x minus 4s are going to cancel. So for my hole, I'm going to set x minus 4 equal to 0. So x is equal to 4. So that is my x coordinate of my hole. So that would be here, 4. How do I find the y coordinate? Plug it in. So I have 4 plus 3 over 4 plus 2. So this would be 7 over 6. Yep. 7 over 6. Next, let's find the horizontal asymptote. What do I look at for the horizontal asymptote? Degree. What if my degrees are the same? I look at the coefficient. So what are my coefficients here? 1 over 1. So how would I write my horizontal asymptote? Y equals 1. For my vertical asymptote, what do I do? Set the bottom equal to 0. So I have x plus 2 is equal to 0. So x is equal to negative 2. How do I find my roots? Set the top equal to 0. So x plus 3 is equal to 0. X is equal to negative 3. So looking at my graphs, which one would this be? A. Because I can see my vertical asymptote goes through negative 2. Any questions? So 11's a little tricky. the top is a little different. We have the sum of cubes, which actually factors. Anybody know what it factors into? It is x plus 1 times x squared minus x plus 1. That's just your sum of cubes formula. So when you have perfect cube times a perfect cube, it would factor into this.
Do we even know this?
No.
So that's not.
How do I factor the bottom?
X plus 1, x minus 1.
X plus 1, x minus 1. So you guys know that one. Do you have a hole anywhere? Are you sure?
Yeah.
So x plus 1 is equal to 0. So x is equal to negative 1 is where my hole is. That's the x coordinate. How do I find my y coordinate? Plug it into what's left. So here I'm plugging in negative 1. Negative 1 squared minus negative 1 plus 1 over negative 1 minus 1. So this would be 1 plus 1 over negative 2. So 3 over negative 2. So my coordinate for the hole is negative 1 comma negative 3 over 2. That's my factored, so that goes in the space for number 1. How do I find my horizontal asymptote? Look at the degree. So I have cubed on top and squared on the bottom. So what would my horizontal asymptote be?
There's none.
There is none. No horizontal asymptote. All right, now let's look at what comes next. Vertical asymptote? What would my vertical asymptote be? Set the denominator equal to 0. So I have x minus 1 is equal to 0. X is equal to 1. So that's my vertical asymptote. And then last is the roots. How do I find the roots? Set the numerator equal to 0. So I'm just setting whatever's left in my numerator equal to 0. So I have x squared minus x plus 1 equals 0. Can I factor this?
Quadratic.
Yeah, quadratic. So I would have negative b, so that would become a positive 1 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So 1 minus 4 times a times c over 2 times a. So in here, I have 1 minus 4, which is negative 3. Can I get a negative under my square root? Nope. So do I have any roots? Nope. None. And then which graph would this one be?